Sawadee Khap, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for coming. This program was organized at very short notice, so thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to have you here. I've just told the panelists not to be discouraged by what seems to be a low level of turnout, and that eventually these things will be, after the program is over, they will be put up on YouTube, so it'll be free to be put on your social media and liked and spread around. So it will eventually turn out to be a far more bigger audience than we have tonight. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil. I'm the executive editor of Travel Impact Newswire. I publish a travel industry website, which is a little bit of a quirky left-of-center alternative perspective that looks at the impact of the travel and tourism industry beyond just the regular economic side of it. And my interest in the panelists really is the fact that the travel and tourism industry is one of the most profligate consumers of food, water, land resources, everything. So there is a huge environmental impact. And I met the four panelists just a couple of days ago at this Ministerial Summit that is being held at SCAP. And it was interesting to see Marjorie, who's the Secretary General of one of the big NGOs organizations based in the Philippines. In her opening comments, she said, "We NGOs need a louder voice." So then I figured, well, if they need a louder voice, I couldn't figure out a better place to give them that voice than to invite them to the club. And lo and behold, here they are. So I just wanted to give you a quick update of some of the programs that will be coming up over the next few days. On the some big ones. On the 13th of September, there'll be a function on the Kra Canal, the world's oldest infrastructure ever. Will it ever get built? On the 20th of September, there is a piece on the Beijing smog, a satirical take on China today, by the author of that book, Ian Williams. On the 28th of September, there'll be a panel on the Yingluck verdict. And on the 10th of November, the FCCT's 60th anniversary party, our 5th cycle, will be on this 10th of November at the Dusut Thani Hotel. So please do join us for these events, and it'll be a pleasure to have you here. I will just introduce the panelists. From the left, we have Wali Haider from Pakistan. I think everybody has got their details in the emails, so I won't go into all the various introductions. But that's Wali Haider, and then next to him is Imogen Ingram from the South Pacific. Then we have Kun Pirawan, and then we have Marjorie from the Philippines, and then we have Kun Pirawan here from the hill tribes of North Thailand. So I'll leave it, the issues they're going to be talking about, really, just to give you a quick encapsulation. The difference between what the NGOs are doing and what the ministers are doing at the summit focuses on the word justice. The ministers will be focusing pretty much on development, the environmental aspects, the economic aspects, and all the funding that is going to be needed to clean up the environment, and so forth, so on. But what these people are arguing for is that there is a justice angle to clean up the mess that has been caused so far and is continuing to be caused and is impacting on many of the social, on poverty issues, on the marginalized people, on the indigenous people, and others who are being affected by a lot of the economic and environmental impact within the Asia Pacific. So the whole focus of the one-day session that they had on Monday it revolved around this justice, that somebody needs to pay for this, and that there needs to be a better system of working out how people are moved from one place to the other, if at all that is necessary. Who is eventually going to end up paying to clean up the mess that has been caused, some historical perspectives on why this mess was caused in the first place, and some very critical issues that are emerging for the future with things like geoengineering, for example, the potential future manipulation of climate to produce to produce the impacts that one is looking at. So whether that is genetically modified foods or manipulation of genes and the DNAs, the climate seems to be next. and there are potential dangers here that are really going to be critical to the future of humanity at large. So many of these issues were actually very comprehensively aired by 4 of the panelists, and there were altogether about 40 of them who were there at the session on Monday. And I must compliment also the United Nations system, which is becoming increasingly accepting and giving the NGOs a platform to try and bring their perspectives out into the public domain and incorporate them into the resolutions and the declarations that come out from these high-level meetings. As they told me earlier on, they're never happy with the voice they get, but then that is where we come in at the FCCT, which is to try them and give them a louder voice in whatever small way that we can as members of the public and as members of the media. So I will ask Marge, who is the Secretary General, to start first and give a comprehensive overview and some of the issues that have emerged, and then I'll take it from right to left down that way. So Marge, would you like to go ahead? 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll, after each one, we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Imtiaz. I will, as Imtiaz said earlier, we're not actually disappointed by a low turnout, because for us this is a very big thing that happened, because previously we've been organizing big conferences in Bangkok for a couple of years already, since 2014, but we didn't know that this wonderful group, FCCT, exists. So we hope that there will be a next time that where we can plan things ahead. But yes, I am Marge from the Asia Pacific Research Network, but I'm also the co-chair of the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. Maybe I'll give you a bit of an introduction about the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, or the APRCEM. We have some brochures over there, this black one. So APRCEM is actually a platform of more than 400 CSOs all over Asia Pacific. So we, back in 2014, we formed the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism with the vision of creating an organized, open, inclusive, and coordinated system of CSO engagement in the region, especially for engaging the UN system on development issues in the region, because we felt that we need, as Imtiaz said, the louder voices for CSOs. And in cases, or in most cases in the region, we're not, our spaces are really getting smaller. So we felt that CSOs need to organize among each other, work together, so that they can get their voices louder. It's actually, I realize that it's actually a special thing for Asia Pacific, which is a very diverse region, because other regions such as Africa or Latin America, or even Europe, they don't have this kind of system wherein a diverse number of CSOs are really coordinating with each other and sharing spaces and supporting each other. So that's a brief introduction of what we are. We currently have more than 400 members in the region, and our representation is really diverse. So aside from the usual NGOs that the governments engage with, we also have grassroots NGOs. So my colleague here is from the farmers groups in Pakistan, and also they are coordinating with farmers groups in Asia. Pirawan here is from the indigenous peoples groups. And we also have members from very marginalized voices, such as migrants, for example, people affected by disasters, and also fisherfolk, who usually don't get to speak in these kinds of spaces. So Asia Pacific Regional CSOs Engagement Mechanism, the framework of its engagement with ESCAP or even with UNEP, the UN system in the region, is on development justice. So I cannot they don't really have, I think, much time to explain the whole framework, but briefly, development justice is what we have been advocating for since 2014, before the Agenda 2030 has been was created. For us, this is a just and transformative framework of a development agenda that addresses people's rights and needs. So it has 5 transformative shifts called redistributive justice, economic justice, social and gender justice, accountability to peoples, and lastly, ecological justice. All of these frameworks, our transformative shifts, are interconnected with each other. But for our engagement with the ongoing Asia-Pacific Ministerial Summit on Environment, where ministers are talking about resource efficiency and eradicating pollution, we are focusing on the part of ecological justice. So for the past few days that we've been talking to the ministers in the UN Center, for us, we realized that the definition of the UN of pollution and resource efficiency does not really capture the diversity of people's realities and lived experiences of our communities. So while indeed that there's an increasing understanding of issues facing our environment and the problem of pollution or even resource efficiency, we feel that the root causes of the pollution and the resource inefficiency that we are all facing today are not being really addressed during these kinds of summits. So we feel that this is still business as usual, and we need to push for changes in that kind of thinking. From our perspective, the barriers that are blocking Asia-Pacific from freedom from pollution or from reaching resource efficiency are the following. One is large-scale land and resource grabbing, which my friend here, Wally, will discuss in detail. The other are trade and investment agreements, which are proliferating in Asia-Pacific and are entrenching corporate capture. We also see militarism and conflict as contributing to that very big pollution problem that we are facing in our region, as well as value systems such as patriarchy and fundamentalisms. So these are really connected to the intensification of environmental plunder that our friends from the indigenous peoples are very familiar with, and the destruction of our local ecosystems and their impacts on food chains. So pollution is really an inevitable cause of our economic system that we have today, which is very profit-oriented, no? And for example, many of the Fortune 500 companies, including Nestle, Cargill, Monsanto, Unilever, which we CSOs in the region have launched campaigns against these companies, they are still able to promote their interests in the region by not only influencing governments directly, but as I mentioned earlier, they have very big influences in the multilateral and bilateral agreements, trade and investment agreements. Also, we are still continuously demanding that the rich and developed and industrialized countries, as well as some of the emerging economies in the region, like are main contributors to climate crisis. We are still seeing that the operations of extractive industries and agrochemical corporations, which are proliferating in the regions, are even being promoted in developing countries. As a result, pollution and resource inefficiency are still going unabated to the detriment of our region. One thing perhaps that I want to raise, which is not really being discussed in connection to pollution or environmental destruction, is militarism, which is a growing problem in the region. And in our briefer here, there's a copy over there, we see that the problem of militarisms, military practices and military actions are contributing to pollution in the region, such as chemical waste, the nuclear waste, the destruction of ecosystems. These are not being discussed in the spaces like this at the UN. Like for example, the military uses millions of gallons, especially the US military in its war in the Middle East. However, when we talk about the reduction of CO2 and other greenhouse gases during the COPs, the Conference of Parties, for example, these are not even considered in the reduction commitments of countries because they're not reported. So that's just one of the impacts of militarism, especially US militarism, on the pollution in the region. So because of that, we strongly advocate for development justice in our engagement and in our demand for ecological justice. We are demanding that the governments here at the talking at the UN Ministerial Summit, that they include principles, or that they adhere to the principles of accountability of polluters by recognizing that the polluters pay principle and also the common but differentiated realities. So perhaps I'll give my colleagues also the chance to give more details about the realities that they are facing on pollution and resource inefficiency in the region. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Marge. Wally?
Thank you, Imtiaz. Since this ministerial or high-level conference is going on pollution, and is also UN Environment is managing and organizing this, so my talk will be on the pollution. For small and landless farmer, I belong to the farmer constituency of APRCEM, as Marge introduced. For us, this pollution or environmental crisis are very important. Because for what? Because when there is disaster of floods, it is who majority severely affected, which those who are the farmers living in the countrysides, particularly those who lives in the riverine belt. In 2010, we had super flood. More than 80,000 people died. Most of them were farmers, and all of their livelihood have been dismantled. So environment or pollution is very important for rural communities, because it's really affecting their life. We emphasize that we need to look at pollution in a broader sense, which include genetic pollution or pollution from the use of the pesticide and fertilizers. Whereas in the UN talk or in the mainstream talk, the genetic pollution is not been one of the source of pollution. Whereas it's very important to emphasize on. The neoliberal era has brought this planet beyond the threshold of ecological limits due to the development model based on over-dependence on fossil fuels, destruction of mineral resources and concentration of wealth, power in fewer people and ANCs, the commodification of natural resources, particularly seeds by agrochemical, particularly Monsanto, Bayer, DuPont, and GM Corporation through dispossession of local communities' right to access and control over indigenous and local seed, generally natural resources. New emerging phenomena of land grabbing by investor is also causing issues of environmental crisis and livelihood. The land is often used for expansion of export crops or cash crop that are dependent on chemical input as well as the production of agrofuels, which creates unhealthy competition with food production and severely restricts poor people access to land and livelihood, especially food. We would like to suggest government should ensure strong policies and implementation of agroecology, as well as support for small and landless farmer movement that are advancing the framework of food sovereignty. These farmer and small food producer are contributing to safe and nutritious food, to healthy soil, water, air and environment, as well as contributing to adoption of climate change. We demand for development justice so that the inequities, particularly for a small producer, can be removed from our society. For this, we need redistributive justice, ecological justice, and most importantly, accountability to the people. Those very corporations I named, for instance, names Monsanto, influence in our countries for even in policy making. Last year in Pakistan there was a Seed Amendment Act, which is basically by the lobbying of international organizations like USDA and corporation like Monsanto. They change our seed laws, and now they were saying that the Pakistani seed law is basically restricting seed research in seed sector and promotion of food and agriculture. Basically, they wanted to control over seed market, agriculture market in Pakistan, and now they have changed that seed law, and now the public sector is no more involved in certification and seed business. All these multinationals, particularly Monsanto, is free to promote even GM seed in Pakistan. So these very corporation, if they have not been accountable to the people, they will be running around on us. And it's very important, because what is happening, they dispossess our natural resources through various reasons, and they got benefit out of that. Only more than six or seven multinational or giant agro business hold more than 70 business of the agriculture, food and agriculture business. That's how they concentrate, and their accumulation of wealth they got. And we need to be united and stand up, especially people from the mass movement and from the grassroots. They need to be stand up and raise their voice, so that not just the crisis, environmental crisis can be dealt with, but their livelihood and food insecurity issues also be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Wali. Imogen?
Right, so now for something completely different. The UN divides Asia Pacific into West Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, North Asia, and the Pacific. So you couldn't actually find a greater contrast with what goes on in Asia, in the Pacific. For us, the SDG 14 on oceans and natural resource management are the most important out of all the sustainable development goals. And this is what we've been discussing this week, how to develop the 2030 agenda using these sustainable development goals that came into being 2 years ago. So I'll just concentrate on two forms of ocean pollution that I think affect us really in the Pacific Islands. We live about halfway between Australia and Chile, in the middle of the Pacific, little speck. And an important report was published in December 2015 by the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, which is called the First Ocean Assessment. In it, they found that out of all the pollution in the ocean, plastics made up 80%. And that out of that 80%, most of it came from land-based activities. So this plastic is either brought down rivers or other waterways, or just dumped over from ships, and it ends up in the ocean. And then it forms these gyres at points where oceans meet, and they kind of, there's a famous one up by Alaska, where it's considered to be the size of Texas, but there's also other gyres in the South Pacific, a little down towards Antarctica. So it's a big concern for us, because these plastics, the colours that are used on the plastics often contain persistent organic pollutants or heavy metals like lead or mercury, and these leach into the ocean water, and the fish take up those pollutants. Apart from the animals themselves swallowing the plastic bags and then dying from starvation, this has an impact on the productivity of fish. And fish is a significant revenue earner for small island developing states. We don't have the capacity to have our own ships, so we give licenses to foreign ships to fish within our waters. And so my hook, if you like, to interest developed countries in why this is an important issue is that we export so much fish to the EU, one of the biggest markets for Pacific fish, and Japan. So they should also be concerned, because the fish on their table might have come from our polluted Pacific. The other area of pollution which is of concern to us for the same reason that it comes from a long way away, and that's methyl mercury in fish. So when you burn coal to generate electricity, it gives off a vapor that contains mercury. So the mercury goes up in the air, and it comes down in the next rainfall into your waterways. Once it gets into the water, it goes through this process called methylation and becomes an organic form of mercury. Again, the fish take it up, and then we eat the fish. It particularly affects fish that eat other fish, what we call trophic fish. So your really big fish like swordfish or marlin will contain considerable amounts of methyl mercury. So these two issues to us are ecological justice issues, quite apart from the climate one where the small islands that are flat are slowly being swallowed up by sea level rise. But this is an ecological issue in that we don't have manufacturing as such in our area, and we certainly don't burn coal. But we are being impacted by the results of these two forms of pollution. Last year I helped to carry out hair sampling of women of childbearing age in 6 different Pacific Island countries. They're only small samples, and the idea was to give the government some basis upon which to ask the WHO to come and do a deeper study. But all of the samples were well over what is considered to be a tolerable dose. There is no acceptable dose for mercury, but a tolerable dose is 1 part per million. And everybody was at least 2 to 3 times higher than that. In colder climates, this results in permanent irreversible brain damage in children when they are born. There are slightly different findings in the tropics, and the scientists are still trying to figure out why. Personally, I think that it might manifest in other ways in health, but you know, usual story. You don't ask the question, you don't get an answer. So I just finish off on those 2 issues that for us, the key things are we have got very different issues than terrestrial or continental Asia, but these are 2 issues that we did not cause to happen to ourselves. With the plastics issue, this idea of David fighting the Goliath, because the manufacturers of the plastics are not in our countries. We have absolutely no way as Pacific Small Island developing states of influencing what they do. So we need a global solution, that is to say countries acting together through the UN to try and get a global solution to this global pollution problem. You can imagine corporates don't take kindly to being told that they can or can't do things. So I think our angle is to point out the health aspects and how it affects people's health adversely, and invoke the user pay for pollution idea, where they should take responsibility for the full life cycle of their product from the time they manufacture it through to its proper disposal. And many times, if you didn't put additives in these plastics, like the colorants I referred to that are heavy metals or toxic chemicals, you might be able to recycle those plastics. So that's one of the things we could start with. We could start with asking or some voluntary arrangement from producers not to make single-use plastics, and not to make the particular plastics that are fused with foil that are so hard to dispose of. I'm not a scientist. I allow the corporate R&D guys to search for the problem. But I'm pretty sure that if you make a company responsible for the disposal of the products it makes, it would probably redesign them so it would be easier to deal with them in an environmentally sound way. So I'll stop there, thank you.
Well said, good. Kun Pirawan?
Good evening, my name is Pirawan, I'm Karen. I'm going to talk on behalf of indigenous people groups. There are around 260 million indigenous people in Asia, we indigenous people mainly depend on land, water, seas, and forests, which is not only the source of food security, livelihood, and well-being, but also is an important part of our culture, value, and identity. 80% of the planet's biodiversity is found in the territory of indigenous peoples. We indigenous people, together with the local communities, have been protecting environment and promoting biological diversity. We are also at the forefront of addressing challenge of climate change by developing community-based adaptation and mitigation measures. Despite our significant actions and contributions, we have still paid unduly high price for pollution and environmental degradation, as our territories are made production sites of corporate farming, where agrochemicals are excessive used. As mining areas, environmental pollution put additional burden on the poorest, most marginalized, and forest and ecosystem-dependent communities. In many countries of the region, we face gross human rights violations, including arrest, detention, harassment, brutal repression, and file fabricated case against us when we start against land grabbing and protect our forests and habitat. For example, in Thailand, due to the increased forest cover up to 40% and restriction in access to natural resources, many indigenous communities were forced to leave their ancestral land, which they have lived there for hundreds of years. Some of them were arrested on charge of the encroaching protected forest. This has severely affected their life and livelihood. Another policy on air pollution, which called 60 days no burning policies. This has an importance to many indigenous and local communities, as they could not practice their traditional farming, or as a shifting cultivation, which is the main source of their food, livelihood, and culture. In response, we are taking up our struggle through various means, include advocacy for legislative change, taking our government or private company to court, mobilizing our networks. We openly confront dominant power structure, political, economic, social, and financial clout. But in doing this, some of our members die. But we have success as well. One of the results is access to land for women has increased, and include community participation in preventing pollution, which needs to be encouraged and strengthened. A pollution-free planet requires concerted, systematic, and genuine efforts on removing system barrier and holistic approach. Indigenous people perspective of holism, traditional knowledge to protect forests, to conserve biodiversity and natural resources would significantly contribute to the solution of climate change, which is why indigenous people full and effective participation in the SDG implementation process is important and will significantly contribute to the solution of climate change and attainment of the goals of Agenda 2030. For the vision of the pollution planet and restoring the health of environment, we urge government and other stakeholders to ensure indigenous peoples and local community participation in decision making and respect our rights to free, prior, informed consent as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People. Recognize, respect, and promote indigenous people's traditional knowledge relating to forest protection and biodiversity conservation and enhancement. Provide greater attention to research on the impact of the increasing militarization and its impact to the environment, unequal trade, treaty, and illicit financial flow on environment. We demand policy coherence, enforcement, and coordinate mechanism, and establish a policy framework creating synergy in the prevention of the pollution and achievement Agenda 2030. Provide security to indigenous people, human rights, and environmental defenders who are relentlessly struggling to defend our homes and territories. Guarantee our collective rights to land, territory, and resources in order to ensure the protection of customary forests that are playing vital role in the purification of the pollution atmosphere. Develop and partnership with the indigenous people, local community in creating pollution-free planet and in restoring health of the environment. You cannot depart people in the ecological system. Indigenous people can provide the answer of the climate change and the SDG. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. I think very important that if you notice, they've all done their presentations bang on time. And even when I was covering the event on Monday, I must say Marge was running a really good shop. I mean, they were given 6 to 7 minutes and everybody stuck to their time limit. And it was a really good outpouring, and there was a tremendous amount of respect for each other's time. So well done, guys. Can I just ask you one question, very important. You'll have all raised some very, very critical points. And obviously you're doing a pretty good job in terms of performing your role as watchdog groups, whistleblowers, truth tellers, whatever names you wish to attach to them. But I'd be very keen to know the problems you yourselves are facing in getting this voice out into the public domain, and whether the harassment and the confrontation and the pressure that you all are facing is actually making things worse for you. Is that also one of the root causes? Because if they try and deprive you of your voice, then really your presence here becomes quite ineffective, doesn't it? So tell us a little bit about the problems you yourselves are facing in confronting governments, multinational corporations, in putting these critical issues out into the public domain. Marge, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, for us CSOs, we don't think ourselves as just as watchdogs telling governments what's wrong with you, how you should do your work. We see ourselves more as development actors in our own right. That means, hi, Trishati. Sorry, I got distracted. No? But yeah, as we see ourselves as development actors in our own right. It's not only the governments who do development actions. It's us when we implement our initiatives, perhaps on developing the capacities of communities to fight pollution, or developing the capacities of communities to engage their governments, to demand their rights. That is development work. And thank you for raising that question on the harassment, on the shrinking spaces that we experience in the region. Actually, what we have been seeing for the past few years is that our spaces for engaging governments are not just shrinking. Some of them are also closing down. And there's a lot of research that has been happening to document those cases. I think that Civicus has done a global research that's very useful to monitor those cases. But for example, countries like the Indonesia and Cambodia has NGO laws. And they have these laws not really to prevent CSOs from being formed, but to make their lives harder. And what is really happening is that it's not only the national level wherein we see our spaces are shrinking or even closing down. Even at the regional level spaces wherein CSOs that have a hard time engaging their own governments at national level, they see the regional level engagement as a chance to get their voices out. Their voices are also being closed down, or their voices are not getting enough spaces. Like for the past few years that we've conducting the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, it started really pretty good, but we've noticed that our spaces for speaking at the panel sessions alongside with governments are shrinking down, and even our spaces for delivering our statements on the floor. But it's not really funny, but the thing is, if our CSO voices are shrinking, spaces for corporate voices are expanding. We've noticed that with the proliferation of free trade agreements in the region, such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which the ASEAN is negotiating with countries like China, Japan, India, and Australia and New Zealand. I think I forgot one more big country. And also like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And in these spaces are totally closed off to CSOs, but they are open to voices of corporations. And these are really binding towards governments because they are free trade agreements. There are sanctions when they do not follow those. But for us, when we engage governments, it's really a fight. It's really a struggle to, one, catch them, and to make sure that what we say actually goes into their own planning and implementation. It's really bad. I guess my colleagues here have stories that are actually happening on the ground to just to illustrate what's happening in our countries.
Thank you. Wally?
Yeah, just to add what Marj have said, that for instance, country like Pakistan, they are injecting a law called NGO Act. So now that those who are the rights-based organization have been heavily watched. So now there are less spaces for them, and there are more rules to restrict them, especially for those who are doing the rights-based advocacy or campaigning and activities. Especially those who are getting foreign funding. So in the name of that, in Pakistan, there is a lot of debate and discussion on terrorism. So they are saying that, the money is coming for terrorism, even for NGOs who are not even has anything to do with this kind of thing, but they are doing, as Mark mentioned, we are not NGOs as a watchdog, we are a development actor. So we do criticize whatever is government is doing. For instance, I mentioned in my talk that for the SEED Act, Roots for Equity, which the organization I believe I belong to, and also one of the mass organization called Pakistan Kisan Mazdoor Tehreek, PKMT, demonstrated, in all districts, the campaign and action against this brutal law, which will restrict local farmer, small farmer, access and control over seeds. But our voices have not been heard, and we even try to engage with the government. But as Mark mentioned, there are lesser spaces of engagement with the government, and let alone the government and other stakeholder, the media. For media, nothing is very charmful to talk about food, agriculture, farmer issues. These items are not breaking news for them. So those who are providing food is not important for us. Though regardless, we are in an agriculture-based country, we are in a developed country. It is the farmer, particularly the small and landless farmer, who provide us food. But news for them is not important for us, even for media. So it's altogether, spaces are shrinking for us, and we need to occupy. And that's how, Imtiaz and organization like FCCT is very important for us. And thank you very much for giving this space. And I hope this voice can be spread.
Come by anytime you want. Imogen?
I'm very fortunate that I come from a small community. So I work on 3 levels. Nationally, my island, we have a population of 10,000 people. So we have a tradition of holding community meetings. And so people get together, and it's a different atmosphere because they're very brave, you know, ask the questions that other people probably would like to know, but they're too timid to ask. So that works very well for me because I can get up and say what I want to say, and then people will question me. So we have this tradition, so it's quite comfortable. In the community, I'm not, you know, that woman, that activist. I'm somebody's wife, I'm somebody's daughter, I'm someone's grandmother. You know, I'm part of the community. I'm not some, you know, NGO type. Then when I moved to the regional level, again in the Pacific, there's a very nice courtesy where I have the auntie factor. So even if they don't agree with what I say, they're too respectful to diss me. Then you get to the international level, and that's where I really had to learn to hold my own, because I belong to a wider global network called IPEN, International POPs Elimination Network, and so they did quite a bit of capacity building with me to get my confidence up to do public speaking and to do stuff like this. And so at one stage, one of the country delegates hissed at me and said, "God, who do you think you are?" You know. So I was a bit stunned and didn't say anything. And then someone else stood up and said, "Don't you talk to her like that." And it was a country delegate, and I thought, right, this is good. You know, I don't have to defend myself. Other people just see that it's not right, it's bad manners, and they will just won't put up with it. So those are the good days. I said earlier, we very rarely come away from a UN meeting feeling happy. On the other hand, as a person from a small island developing state, you know that your island has no economic clout, no political clout. The only way you're going to get any redress for your grievances is in this international forum where, because of international law, you have equal weight to another country that has got, far more capacity. So I value the UN for giving us that space. People criticise this a lot. I had to tell someone the other day, the UN is not a policeman. The UN is made up of 200 countries. We thrash out solutions to a global problem. They come up with suggested, like a convention, but that does not govern the individual nation. That nation has to go back, incorporate into its national legislation the rules in that convention, and then they have to apply them. That is how we get improvement. And in the Stockholm Convention on POPs, we have a process called effectiveness evaluation. And so you go around doing monitoring of the environment to show, so countries have to do these reports and say, we monitored this and that, and we started off with this much, and we've been able to reduce it, so we can show that what we are doing is effective. So I think probably 1/3 of those 200 countries were able to report effectively on that. The rest of us are still have to try harder. But nevertheless, I think that it's still better than not having that big forum for discussion. And I think that, my dad always used to say, there's no such thing as the good old days, It was all bad.
Thank you. Quinpirwan?
Let's be in reality. Just a simple question like the power. The power is in whose hand? So indigenous people, we are the less power. Even like in Thailand, we are not recognized indigenous peoples in that term, or like in our constitution. So you can see like the power of negotiation is seemingly like you cannot see at all. And being indigenous people, you were treated as the second class by the stereotype that's still there in the society. And being in this town, even for you, freedom of expression at the basic of the human right. It's difficult. How are you going to raise your voice? You are a small number already, and then you will suppress to not even raise your voice. So the matter is really like who holding the power, and will that power given to the small people like us or not? If that door open for us, and the door open, and would they listen to us? That is the time that we can find a way for us.
Yeah, excellent. I think the other very important thing I noticed was that when I checked out the websites of many of your NGOs, I mean, you've got some remarkably good stuff out there. I mean, it's really amazingly good. And particularly Marge's, with all the other NGOs that she's got listed on hers, there's some really good stuff out there. So it's all out there in the public domain. And it of course, adds to the whole debate about where development justice is going. Can I open the floor up to questions, ladies and gentlemen? As there is, maybe just use, go ahead and use, or if you want to just ask it from here, if you want to, no, you want to use the mic? Oh, sorry, sorry, it's being recorded. It's being recorded, I apologize. Yeah, you'll have to use the mic.
On many occasions, I've learned that people can't hear me. So if there's a mic, I will want to use it. I have several questions. But
sorry, could you just identify yourself first?
I'm Andrew Silver, a retired un-American. I have a few questions, but I'll ask only one and then wait until other people ask to go.
Thank you,
ask
excellent.
A second. So my first question simply, I'm confused about the terms CSO and NGO. I don't know to what extent they are overlapping or distinguishable. So I don't know who can answer this, but can you please, probably Marjorie, can you please clarify what is an NGO and what is a CSO?
Marge?
Okay. Actually, they are really overlapping, but in our parlance, CSO is like the umbrella identification for all of those self-organized organizations, organizations that are not government entities. But within those, that big identification or big umbrella of CSOs, there are different classifications of CSOs, and there is not one literature that really identifies all of them. But for us, NGOs, the non-government organizations, are different from grassroots organizations, like, for example, the indigenous peoples forming their own organizations, or the farmers' organizations forming, or the farmers forming their own organizations. For us, NGOs are more like advocates of those working with those grassroots organizations. So there is not really one canon or definite classification, but it's really how we identify ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
I hope I didn't confuse you more.
No.
Wally, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, for me, as I take it, that civil society means as Marge mentioned, is a broader organization. For instance, in civil society, you can count trade unions, you can count the lawyers' organization, you can count teachers' associations. But for NGOs, it's basically those who are getting foreign funding or doing any kind of other development work. But for civil society is a much more wider area of work, and you can count all of these.
Thank you. You had a question, sir?
Yes.
Please.
My name's Peter Trainer. I'm a photographer and a transport plan and consultant. I just wanted to ask a general question to the panel. One of the members mentioned earlier that there's a lot of standards that you measure for pollution. You can tell if pollution is changing, if it's getting better or it's getting worse. And it's also been pointed out that there's a lot of factors working against the work that you do, that you're up against big corporations and governments which don't want to change or have their own agenda. So my question is, how do you measure whether you're making any difference or not in terms of social justice or just damage to human rights or to justice? How do you know if you've made any difference? It's very difficult for you to do anything, and the people that you're fighting against have got their own agenda and don't want to change. So either over a year or over the period that you've been in your positions, how do you know if you're making any difference, apart from the fact that your organizations are getting smaller, that you've got less representation? That's a negative measure. But how do you know if you're having any impact on public opinion or public awareness or anything?
Oh, I'll take the first answer to that. I'm sure you'll get it from the others as well. Well, I started going to this UN forum on business and human rights for the very reason that you stated, is that you think, well, this is, kind of asymmetric arrangement here. I'm at the bottom with very little money, fighting this big corporation that's got a lot of money and well-paid lawyers. So I started going to this UN forum on business and human rights, and it was huge. There were like 5 or 6 parallel sessions, and the very intense 40 minutes, and then you had to choose which one you were going to. So I fastened upon redress and grievance, rooms full of lawyers. But right now, next month, I think it's 24th to the 28th of October, they will start negotiating there are calls for a legally binding convention, a legally binding instrument on transnational corporations and human rights. So that will be starting in October in Geneva under the Human Rights Commission. So I think the mere fact that they've got that far means there's enough strong feeling to even countenance holding such a forum. Of course, when I attended the other precursor meetings, I began to feel that the problems in the small island developing states were quite dwarfed by what's going on in Latin America and Africa and stuff like that. But nevertheless, it's important to me, so I keep pushing it. But I think that is probably the most important gauge to me, where we've got as far. It took 20 years to pass the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There were 2 countries that held out, New Zealand and Canada. But it did get passed, and so I can remember saying in despair to the human rights representative, how on earth is this convention ever going to get passed? And I think the reason that it gets passed is that over time, people become more conscious, more aware of the inequalities and inequities. And so what might have seemed once impossible becomes possible.
Kun Pirwan, would you like?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just would like to share on the local context. Since we're working on the issue and we are the people movements, and we're doing advocacy and capacity building, awareness raising with the local and also in the government thing. So we can see the strength of the community has gained. So just for example, we're doing the community mappings. So this thing is helping the community to collect their data and their profile, which can tell their history, which they can negotiate with the government that whether they are lived there before or after the declaration of the national park or conservation area, that is allow them to have a chance to prove that they lived there before the announcement of any law. So government allow them to stay there. That just for example, like you can see like before people doesn't know their rights and don't know what instrument that they can have the power to negotiate. So this is just one example that we can see the change. Yeah.
So it's a general increase in public awareness as your measure.
Well, in the case of the conventions I talked about, there's scientific measures that you take. For instance, the methyl mercury in hair, we sent all the samples off to the same laboratory so that we got consistent results. And then, you know, the aim is to like reduce those readings over time. And some of the men complained and said, "Why are you not taking my hair samples?" You know, and I said, "I'm all for gender balance." You know,
Yeah.
but
Well,
you can do scientific monitoring, and that is one way that you can persuade, you know, policymakers that there is a problem which does need regulation.
Wally, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, you see, there are various aspects and dimensions of measuring of our work. Since it's very political and you see very powerful players are playing, but there are success stories. For instance, for this report which just came out, development justice is there. You know, we can't say there are some substantive success or gains, but at least some languages which has been rejected or has never been even discussed in official forums have been adopted. So and even able to at that stage, we struggle a lot. Why we are here? Because of our struggle. Is not the case that in these kind of intergovernmental forums, civil society have been given much spaces, and in any of these other spaces. So this is the people's movement and struggle which bring us in a situation where in some time they heard us as well. So in any rights, you know, UHDR or child rights or women rights, these all conventions are there because of people have struggled along the way and in the history. So it's a very complicated measuring way, but we can measure in some sense.
Marge? Sorry, Imogen, can I just ask Marge to say before you come on? Yeah, Marge, what do you want to?
Yeah, so indeed Wally said that there are a lot of metrics that we can use to measure that, no? One is on the language that appears in these kinds of documents. For me, the greater recognition of the need to integrate the social, economic, and environmental pillars of development by the governments is not a result of them wanting to do that actually, but for me, it's a result of years, even decades of engagement and campaigning by CSOs. Even the language on inequality in the current SDGs, that's a result of the decades of pushing of CSOs that governments should recognize that inequality needs to be addressed. But aside from language, another metric would be what is the impact of our kind of work in the communities. That's really hard to measure when all the odds are against you. For us, we recognize that these changes can take even decades of years and decades of hard work. But for us, the immediate measure of success that we want to see is that if people on the ground see the relevance of these kinds of agreements to their lives, and if the people are able to articulate their rights, if the people are able to assert their rights even though they are being repressed. Indeed, the spaces are closing down, they're shrinking, all odds are against us, but we struggle, we get creative, and we continue to push for our rights.
Imogen, go ahead.
So I just wanted to have the talk of a success story triggered a memory of one of my mentors when I first started doing this work was an American, and he said you have to have a long-term view on this or you're going to burn out early out of frustration. So he said lead and petrol. When the scientists first said that lead and petrol was a problem and it was affecting children's brains, you know, industry said, oh, they're a bunch of loonies, and tried to discredit them. And then more and more information came out, more and more publicity. Ordinary people started to worry about whether their kids were getting affected by lead and petrol, poisoning the air and causing brain damage. And he said this kind of more information came out and this groundswell developed. And then he said that suddenly rich people realized that all the money in the world would not stop their kids from getting the same brain damage. And that is when they decided, okay, we'll stop putting lead in petrol. It was an unnecessary additive. So that was a success story.
Yeah. Any more questions? Mr. Silva, you had a couple more, so the floor is yours.
And it took 20 years.
Decades.
Sounds like the cigarette
So
lobby.
decades, exactly.
Well, this question's for Napirawan. I didn't understand what you said about the 60-day ban on burning the forest. And I'm interested. I've lived previously in Chiang Mai. I don't live there now simply because I think I would not still be alive if I had to live there with the amount of air pollution there is from February until the monsoon starts. But anyway, what is the position of your CSO regarding the slash and burn agriculture? And is it really the major factor in the air pollution, or is corporate agriculture also a major contributor?
Okay. The 60-day policy is like just not allowed to burn for the certain month, which is the cycle of the period of the shifting cultivation that people will burn certain time within just a few days, 2-3 days that they're going to burn, because in the shifting cultivation system you need to burn to like how to say, to make the area is ready for planting. Yeah, of course, like many people thinking like that is really cause of the air pollution, but they're looking at just only that certain time. They're not looking in the overall of the year, like where is the pollution come from. Is it just only causing from the community practice their traditional knowledge on that? Because there is a study and research that's proved that the shifting cultivation system is low carbon system, and is really the core value of indigenous people. And even the Ministry of Culture recognized shifting cultivation as one of the heritage. This is the traditional cultural heritage. But that's why we try to advocate that this practice is not really like causing the whole problem theme. But our daily life is the who live in the city, you can see like you contribute, you produce the carbon more than the cycle of one time of the people, few number of people who practice their traditional knowledge. Yeah, that's what I want to present. Yeah.
Any more questions? One more? Okay.
Maybe I can ask it.
I think you'll have to use it's been recorded, Mr. Silver, so it'll go up on YouTube later. So otherwise, they won't be able to hear. The public won't be able to hear the question.
I just want to ask Mr. Hyder for clarification about the lobbying done by USDA with Monsanto to change the seed law. USDA is the American government. So are you saying that the American government is forcing other governments to adopt the Monsanto seed laws?
It's politics, no? It's not forcing. I don't say forcing. I say that this is not just USDA or FAO and because in their documents, if you read, they say that Pakistani current seed law, even in USDA document, The Pakistani current seed law is restricting foreign corporation to do their business in Pakistan. Hence, it needs to be changed. Because in Pakistani seed law is limits seed research and development in seed sector. Hence, there is a need to change Pakistani seed law. So, is in a broader perspective, they are promoting that Pakistani seed law change in such a way where it supports or facilitate corporations, and Monsanto, particularly the US corporation, has lobbied directly the commission, the parliamentary committee, which is doing the discussing the seed law directly. They have said that it would be good if Pakistani government or Pakistani parliamentarian will adopt this law. And Monsanto, above all, is sending Pakistani public researcher institutions in universities, teacher and student exchange program to US and and other countries. So there are various ways how they influence. So it's not in sense of a literal sense of forcing. It's in very softer manner. They manipulate not just our seed law. They manipulate our politics even.
Friendly persuasion, right? They call it. Any more questions? I have one last question. Please, sir, go ahead.
I'm from the so-called NGO world. Habitat for Humanity started as a kind of grassroots movement, and I think one of the keys to success was the guy who founded it in 1970s, early 70s.
Sorry, your name is, sir? Your name is?
Robin Shell.
Thank you.
Was brilliant at identifying a story and how a situation of people being denied access to homes because of their color or because of their economic situation, identifying a story about the impact on an individual or a family and the economic impact on the local community, and then telling those stories. And I'm just wondering, I think I hear a bit of that going on, but I'm just wondering how often in your organizations, when you have a platform to speak, you could take human interest stories and talk about the impact on humans and the impact on economics in a kind of personal way, whether that might help. It's just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, the whole communication, that's part of the reason why you guys are here. Marge, you want to start? We'll go through the usual order.
Maybe my friends from the more community-based organizations will be able
No, we'll just use the usual order. So you started the session, so then I'll work my way through the same. So go for it.
Because I've
no, you don't.
As an NGO, I always give deference to those coming from the communities. But yeah, well, I have to admit that we came really we had a bit of unpreparedness coming here, preparing for those stories with stories close that are very that show human impacts, the impacts on human stories. No, but I guess well, I want to share a personal story, if I may, on the impacts of the environment and the nexus of militarism. When in my younger life, in the earlier days of my life, before joining this regional NGO that I'm with, Asia Pacific Research Network, I was part of the environmental movement in the Philippines called the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment. And we are a membership organization of the communities affected by environmental plunder, such as mining. And in one of our campaigns against black sand mining operated by the Chinese in the northern parts of the Philippines, we come to these communities that are asking for our help in campaigning against these black sand mining. But apparently, everything is up against these communities because the local government is colluding with the Chinese companies. And together, they are hiring military people and police to harass those who are fighting the operations from the black sand mining. So they are losing their homes from the mining process. They are losing their fishing grounds from the black sand mining processes, and their environments are being destroyed, and they have nowhere to go else to go to. So in their process of campaigning against them, they invited us, and so we're preparing for a big protest. But the mayor didn't want to hear our voices and started to call on the local military. And then they just, well, in our spaces where we say that we have human rights, and in that small community in northern part of the Philippines, I said to the mayor, we have human rights here, we have the right to raise our voices. But he told me, what human rights? I am the mayor here. You have no human rights here. I am the law. So they started grabbing people around me and punching them. But I don't know if I say I'm lucky that I'm a woman, but that's a very bad statement, but it somehow saved me from that kind of physical harassment. So eventually when we got out of the clutches of the mayor, I was amazed by how the community really tries to protect its own advocates. So they got me out of the community, and then when I returned home, I learned that the mayor was already looking for me with his military forces at night. If they didn't get at that hour, if they didn't get out of that community at that hour, I will not be here in front of you. So this is one of those stories that show the nexus of corporate greed, the so-called call for resource efficiency, the so-called call for the fight against pollution, and it's not happening at the community level. And if these environmental laws or environmental resolutions that we are formulating at the regional or at the national level do not change the lives of those people in that kind of community that I was with, then I don't know what will.
That's great. With a good screenplay and some mood music, that could become a great movie in its own right. Wally?
You see, since we work on the ground, we have thousands of stories. Each house have stories. I know families in Karachi. It's a mega city, 10th largest city. Women wearing burqa. You see burqa? What burqa? Hiding their body. Just because they only have one dress to wear. Only one. The young girl has to go to school or college and wear an tuition center where other girls comes, so they have other fancy dresses. To hide that, the young girl started wearing burqa so that the same dress people don't see. With land grabs, mechanizations, thousands of farmers have been displaced and their livelihood have been displaced. With this free market economy, free trade, the employees, the labor have been displaced from their jobs. And now we are in the age of the human rights and child rights and all that. The families are forced to send their children to work on the streets. You come to Karachi, not in a rural part of Pakistan. You will see a different kind of world. I'm telling a city which is called mega metro city, Karachi. You will find hundreds of thousands of children working on the street, whereas they has to be in the schools. They should have a good, decent life. But these very trade policies enforced by IMF and the World Bank forced laborers and rural marginalized communities in very inhuman conditions. Look, the locality which lives around the big cities, the Kachi Abadis, which slums, they have no basic necessities of life, whereas in main center you have everything. So in that kind of very huge crisis, one can share stories and stories and stories, and of course people on the ground have using those stories whenever it is needed.
Thank you. Imogen?
Well, what inspired me to do this kind of work is there's an Inuit woman in Alaska, and she noticed, she was a district nurse, and she noticed clusters of illness around certain villages, and she noted them, and she didn't know enough, but she thought there's a pattern here, and she kept on badgering doctors until one doctor finally listened to her and carried out some tests. He tested the blood, and again, if you don't ask the question, you know, you're not going to get the answer. So these people were the Inuits who live in the Arctic Circle, had high POPs levels in their blood, that's persistent organic pollutants, and they don't live anywhere near an industrial plant or anything. It was inexplicable. So they found out that these chemicals are borne there by the wind because of the Coriolis effect. Everything ends up around the poles, and that's getting into their food chain. But I thought that was a good story for me. She changed a lot of people's lives. We wouldn't have the Stockholm Convention without her. And that is why the executive director was given a soapstone carving of a woman in a whale. And whenever we have that meeting, someone always asks, where's the statue? But she just, you know, made such a difference and just going about doing her job. And I thought, right, this is the good way to go.
Yeah, that was a good question. A lot of interesting stories coming out. Go ahead, Peter One.
I'm not sure that have you ever heard the name of Billy, a current guy, Polaji. He is the environmental activist. He has his wife and babies like living in the forest in Ban Bang Kloi in Keng Kracha National Park. Billy, the current people there, they were forced from their homeland to live in another area because of the policy, like you cannot live in the protected area, so the people have to leave, even though they live there more than hundreds of years. And Pu Koi, or grandfather Koi, he has the coin that proves that he's live in Thailand. He got the coin from the royal family. But even though with that historical evidence, still they have to leave their homeland, which they live there for many generations. Their shifting cultivation land, their sacred area, their spiritual has left behind. One day, Billy, his house was burned, and many people house burned and forcing to leave their homeland. So he is the one who standing up, fight for his people, find the evidence, follow with all the international instruments and the law that exist in the UN system. Unfortunately, one day he was disappeared. The last scene, he was with the officer of the forest officership. Until now, we don't know where he is. But that is making the people stronger. People come together. And his wife, who is a single mom, has to come up as the leader to lead, to fight the justice for her husband and her community. And right now, she's still doing that work. Yes. Thank you.
That's why we say, when people united, will never be defeated.
Please.
I'm Juthathipani Pong. I'm from Thailand Environment Institute. I'm also NGO and I'm part of CSO. I got two points. Okay, first point, I would like to raise the issue about how do we evaluate or how do we measure our work. For example, my office, I would like to say that we are one of the organizations advocate and campaigns about pollutant in the eastern seaboard of Thailand. And then now you can see that I would say that the quality of environment has been improved. Okay, but we get some kind of negative impact from that campaign, from that advocacy. And then I would say that we get a kind of like the word saying that all the NGO are always against the investment. So that is the result of our campaigns. And the second issue, I like to throw the questions to our friends to respond the issue about new generation. I know it's very hard to get the new generation, younger generation, to work on NGO, to work on CSO. How are we going to go forward?
Okay, good. Marge, the usual order.
I always
two very interesting questions. Yeah, are you against investments, and what is the negative impact on the economy of your campaign? And
We're not necessarily against investments. We're against investments that are harmful and violate people's rights. Like, for example, investments in resource grabs that affect the communities of indigenous peoples, that destroy their lands, that grab their investments in supposedly climate-smart agriculture, but actually promote GMO and more pesticides, or investments in public-private partnerships that sounds nice, but they are actually a new form of privatization and worsens the lack of access of peoples to basic services like education or transportation or health, because these supposed services are now being used for profit-making activities. So we're not really against investments, but more on those investments that are harmful and violate people's rights. And that's why we're calling for governments to consider what kinds of investments that they should take inside their countries. No, if it does not meet, if those kinds of investments do not meet human rights standards, then they should not be done. That's what we've always been telling them. And on the issue of how to make the youth involved, that's also hard, because in the era of I think there's really a lot of distraction, and Dominic and I were talking about fake news earlier. So how do we really engage them? Also, some sharing from a past life. In my younger days, I worked with 350.org, and it's mainly organizing the youth to educate them about climate change and to mobilize them to demand climate justice. It really takes organizing on the ground. It's not, well, social media can be used because they're always on Facebook, they're always on Twitter, but for us, what we've learned is nothing really beats solid on the ground organizing. Really devoting time, talking to them, educating them, and making them realize that, hey, climate change will affect your future. This convention on POPs will affect your future. We really need to go down with them and talk with them. And of course, it would be very good if these are integrated in our education system. But for us, it was really solid organizing with students, especially students, for them to get involved in these kinds of issues.
Wally?
You know, it's it's a very common question. No? Even people say, you are against science.
You what?
No, against science.
Against science.
You know, if the investment of the science bring hunger in our part of the world, do we need to agree or accept that? If an investment, dispossessed our resources, which is supposed to be historically ours, do we need to accept that kind of science or investment? No? So the science or investment, anything which gives power to the people, of course we agree to that. If a common people or a labor or farmer can access and control to that technology, or the benefit of that investment goes to the communities, of course we need that kind of investment. But if an investment gives trillions of dollars to one multinationals, and they commodified our resources. Do we need to reject or resist, or we need to accept them? So I don't mind what people out there are saying for me, that we are very aliens people and demanding something which is not in line with this current era. But our focus is our people. Whatever is benefiting for our people, we need to go for that. And if something is stopping our people for their rights, for their livelihood, for their jobs, we need to resist. Unless or until we resist, this investment is going to be, all the ripe will go by these corporations. So that need to be very carefully. If anything, any investment is supporting local communities, their lifestyle is being increasing, if their health is being increasing, then it's okay. But if the health facility is being more expensive, more inaccessible for those who already don't have any resources, then we need to reject that and we need to oppose and resist.
What about the young people attracting?
Young people. Yeah. That's important, because we are facing the same problem. Especially in agriculture and farming, the young people don't have any interest, because they say it's outdated, it's backward to do agriculture. It's a challenge. We are also working with youths and finding very hard mobilizing them. I think we need education, because this university and this mainstream education system gives youth a fake dream. Oh, you can also have this iPhone, you can also have this lifestyle. That's why they don't have any interest in living in their farmlands. And when they come to the cities, they spend 20 years, they can't even have ordinary phone, because they work in a very inhuman condition, and very the labor condition, their wages and their houses, everything is not been up to the mark with a city's life. They used to live in slums, and they spend all their life in slums dreaming they will have the iPhone and all these gadgets. So we need to decipher this reality, that this what is you dream is not is fake. It's because of this corrupt system. And unless or until we do mass education, popular education with youths, and demystify this kind of conception, it's really hard. It's really hard to mobilize youth.
Thank you. Imogen?
Well, on the investment question, I agree with the previous speakers. If it doesn't meet human rights standards, then it's not worth implementing. Regarding the youth thing, when I went to the same meeting in Kazakhstan in 2010, I was amazed that they had all these young people come to the meeting as NGOs, and it turned out that the communities were so annoyed about the environmental degradation that was going on with oil exploration, that some of these science teachers from the schools decided that they would take the students out and do sampling and then teach them how to process the samples and stuff like that. And those kids were hooked. So I think that's probably the way to do it. And also in our traditional way, the child goes with the grandparent and they work in the fields, or they go fishing, or whatever it is that you need to do to gather food. And so that's how you teach the child the basics, because grandparents are generally more patient than the parent. But I know that after I went to live in New Zealand for education and university, then I returned back to the island to live with my husband, and he was like mystified, and why do they do things this way? But I had that grounding, and I could explain to him, they're not, there's a reason for doing it this way, and it's going to be easier in the long run. So I think that inculcating a sense of curiosity in a child, and then, you know, giving them the skills to take that curiosity further, it would be a good start. Thanks.
Kunpirawan?
Yes, I think I support like much. Just imagine like someone want to come to your house and you don't know at all who is that person. Will you allow that person to into your house? It's the same thing. If someone coming to my land and they not even say what they're going to do with my land, I don't know what is good or bad to my, and what I will benefit from that or not. And you want to take it without any inform and not even get my consent, and you enter my house. So it's really like we love development, not like we against anything, but development should based on human rights. You should respect the people, because without the human rights, the development cannot be like sustainable. That what I should say. Like we have to respect the human rights, the people. And for the young people,
like you.
Yeah, I used to be a young leader, the youth. Actually, indigenous people, we do have to revival our traditional knowledge and transfer to the new generation. And of course, the mainstreaming education and idea is quite strong. We have to also fight against that current of the strong mainstream. But we do have the people, like, it's just people who are interested, because once they know what is their father, mother, their forefather struggling with that, they have interest in that and they want to move on in that. But we have the limitation. You cannot practice your knowledge because you don't have the land or where you can practice anymore. Like for me, when I was young, I can go collect the fish, I can find the mushroom, I can swim in the swimming, but now I'm not allowed to collect the mushroom. I cannot do hunting, fishing. Then how this traditional knowledge can be transferred? You don't have place to teach them where to find the food. And now you have to find the food in the city. That is, you have to pay with your labor. So yeah, you don't have option as well.
No.
Thank you.
I mean, it's fascinating because, you know, you see people like these, very smart people, good communicators, very well informed, and very, very clearly focused, coming and making some very, very good points about the future of humanity. And really, I mean, I'm really happy they came out here tonight. And of course, will be a lot of this stuff will be put up on YouTube, and please do circulate it across to all your networks and everything else. If there's no more questions, I will ask one final question. You know, at the end of this conference, there will be a nice resolution and a declaration, and a lot of people will spend a lot of time negotiating minutiae, words, and so forth, so on. But how do you then decide at the end of 1 year whether this whole effort has been worth it? The environmental ministers here, sometimes I get the feeling that these meetings are like preaching to the converted. You know, you see the same people coming and having the same speeches and others. So 1 year from now, if you were to look ahead and say, how would you hold this entire exercise accountable? And going back to the issue of measurement, what's against what parameters will you decide, or will you judge whether this meeting this week has proved successful, or did it turn out to be a waste of time?
For me, it would be two things. One, I would like to see an improvement of CSO engagement, not just in the number of people attending the forum, but also in more meaningful participation in the program of these kinds of events, no? Being able to speak at the level that you're equal with governments, that would be one. But it might take more than 1 year, Imtiaz, to achieve that. Two, it would be if there will be an improvement on if there will be improvement on the language that we are pushing, like recognition, I was mentioning earlier, recognition of polluters pay, re-recognition. These are things that have been actually been agreed on or have been talked about in the past meetings. But we want to see a re-recognition of the polluters pay principle and the principle of common but differentiated realities. These two are being pushed out slowly, but we want to see them put back in these kinds of conversations. But Imtiaz, it might not be, we might not see it in 1 year.
I'm not sure we have the time at the rate of change. Wally?
You know, the one judging of next year, we will be more prepared to come here at FCCT, and this time we met you, thankfully. So that was a very good
you hear that,
part
Dominic?
of that.
We'll be better prepared.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you.
You know, for me, following up, apart from Marge said, whatever said is the would be the criteria, but it might take more than 1 year. Is maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years. No, we need to be persistent in our advocating our ideas and agendas. But also, what I need to do, what we need to do is how, if these ministers are promising something here, how they are implementing in their back home. You see, this is, if sometimes, many times, when you are in New York, in UN headquarters, or here, or Nairobi, your government is saying something which is, 180-degree different than what they are doing. But you tend to be polite and listen to them, you see. So this happened so many times. So, but at the end, what matters? That what is happening at our home respective countries. If they agreed to the redistributive justice or development justice, if these very respective countries are doing anything which is related to development justice or not. So I'll be doing and we will be doing that if this is the case.
Wonderful. Imogen?
Well, I've been told that I'm a person who's a visual thinker. So that mentor who told me you need a 20-year time scale or else you're going to burn out early from frustration. So this meeting is a ceramic tile in a mosaic. So the mosaic is 10 years old. I look behind me, the mosaic is there, it's durable, it's going to last. This one goes to the next point. Next year there'll be another mosaic tile laid. It's an overall pattern. But when I stop doing this work, someone else will step in and that will keep going. So I think Wali's got it right. You've got to have persistence, optimism, belief in law, because, it stops people fighting law. And I don't, with what I know, what I've learned, I can't do anything different. I can't not do it anymore.
Yeah.
Very passionate. Go ahead, Kunpirawan.
Actually, this is my first time attending the UN meeting or this kind of big meeting. And I kind of not really don't know what's going on at the beginning. And I feel like, okay, next time I have to prepare to understand this system, because for me it's really something difficult. And of course, English is not my first language, so it's kind of difficult as well. But what I know, okay, what should I do next? And how the government will implement this promise into action. Because only the paper is the word. It doesn't really make any change. So yeah, of course we have to follow up what the government will do. And then from my side, I want to do better. How can I really bring the voice of my people to be heard in the meeting? How I can try better from today to the next year. Thank you.
Bravo. Absolutely brilliant ending to this. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. And once more, I'd like to thank the panelists for, at very, very short notice, for coming and joining us today. I do hope we can all work together and push this message out to as wide an audience as possible. And also, I'd also like to thank Dominic for all his help in getting this event together. And thank you all for coming and spending your time this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. And have a very good evening.